Hey, I'm Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and I've got Nick Ridgeway with me here today, and we're going to talk about the upcoming changes to single-family zoning in the city of Seattle coming up. Hey guys, so I got Nick Ridgeway with me here. Quick intro. He pretty much does a little bit of everything.
That's right.
Real estate agent, land acquisition agent, investor, builder, developer, house flipper. I mean, what can you tell people about what you do? What do you like to call yourself? Superhero?
It really, my wife always asks me, it really depends on the day. I mean, I think there are three main parts to my business. I'm a real estate broker, but I really focus on land, specifically urban in-city infill development. Okay. We have about 10 homes under construction right now. So definitely I would consider myself a small scale builder developer. And then recently have gone to work with a company called Legacy Group Capital and doing some funding for smaller builder developers like myself, helping them just grow their businesses and finance their projects. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, in my experience, like you're somebody that's passionate about development in the city, urban development, but also you really like to preserve the character and quality of the neighborhoods. Can you speak to that?
Most definitely. I mean, I don't know if you want to jump right in now to
just talk about that. I mean.
So, let's be specific about what we're addressing, because there have been some recent upzone changes in the city of Seattle, and that had to do with HALA and mandatory inclusionary zoning. And we're probably going to just do a separate video on that.
Yeah.
What we're talking about today is specifically affects single family zoning, and specifically with accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units, ADUs and DADUs. Now there was a big holdup. This has been in process for over 4 years. And there are people we like to call them NIMBYs in the business, standing for not in my backyard. And the fear, I think, and maybe some of the misinformation with the zoning really had to do with, hey, are we going to lose the character of our neighborhoods? And I'm a big fan I love going to neighborhoods like Queen Anne, Wedgwood, View Ridge, and you get to see just some of this history. And the goal is to see that preserved. And I think this code, as we dive into it today, maybe we can address some of that, how it's going to help. It's going to help increase density, provide more housing options for people, but also preserve some of this cool single family stock that we have.
It's awesome. So, yeah. Well, glad to have you here. Thanks for coming. Let's start off with, okay, what are the major zoning changes that the City of Seattle Council just approved?
Sure.
Like, what's coming down the pike?
Okay, let's talk about where we were and then where we are now. So the way it was before is you could have single family zoning in the City of Seattle. And with a single family house, you were allowed to do one accessory dwelling unit. It could either be attached or it could be detached. Yep. And there were limits on square footage, size, if it was attached, it could be 1,000 square feet. If it was detached, 800. But there are also other limits there. One was a homeowner occupancy covenant, which basically said, Zach, if you were going to build an ADU on your house, you had to live in at least 6 months out of the year in either the ADU or in the house. Yeah. And there were other things. I mean, the code was pretty long. Certainly it's great if you're having trouble sleeping, that's what you dive into and read. The amendment's 39 pages long.
It'll put you to bed.
So, but there were other parts to it that limited parking and things like that had requirements. So the changes that happened, and the city council voted on it. Okay. Now it's up to the mayor to sign. I believe Mayor Durkin's scheduled to sign it today. Which is July 9th. July 9th. And then it'll go into effect, whenever she does sign it, it will go into effect about 30 days after she signs it. So a lot of people have questions as far as the timing. And then what this really does, though, is it does a couple of things. It gives people, homeowners, the opportunity to build not just an ADU, but also a detached ADU. And
so 2 units.
2 units, and there's no homeowner occupancy covenant. And which again gives flexibility to a homeowner. If all of a sudden you build an ADU, or let's say you build both, and then something happens, you have a life event, which, as we both know in the real estate business, that happens. Yep. That's what really typically triggers a sale. Yep. you'd be stuck with the old code. With the new code, you can say put a tenant in there. Put a tenant in there maybe only for a year. Let's say you're going on a mission trip and you decide, hey, we have an opportunity to go do this. And so it really gives people a lot of flexibility. And then as far as size, with a detached ADU, now you're allowed to go to 1,000 square feet. There are still really good, what I consider really good limits. So as far as size and the impact on the neighborhood. What I love about this in comparison, say what state of Oregon is doing, which they're pretty much abolishing single family zoning and they're allowing duplex, triplex, fourplexes on single family lots. We're sort of kind of doing de facto duplex, triplexes with this, but it's still going to preserve some of that character. When you walk down where we're sitting right now in the Roosevelt Maple Leaf neighborhood, some really cool old houses. We don't want to see those disappear, and we certainly don't want to see those get torn down and a McMansion built. And so what this new code specifically allows a homeowner to do is to expand their main house to a certain extent, build an ADU, let's say in the basement. They can build a 1,000 square foot apartment, which around here will rent for a pretty penny. And then build a detached ADU as well. So, and why this is important, I think when you look at any sort of change or movement, especially in business, you look at what's called the triple bottom line. It's the economic impact, the environmental impact, and then the social impact. Economically, I think it's going to be a big factor. Because right now what we have is we have an affordability issue in the city of Seattle. And what increasing housing options does is it's just simply supply and demand. When we have more options for people to either live in and buy or to rent, it creates opportunity to make a lifestyle decision. And then the environmental impact. I've always been a big believer of urban infill. We're using existing infrastructure. We're using existing systems like fire, police, school, those sorts of things. And then I think the social impact is huge because kind of some of my history. We wanted to practice what we preach, and so we had a couple of different life events happen to us. We have a family, my wife and I have 3 kids. We have a family of 5. We lived in a 650 square foot ADU, a basement apartment, very difficult, humbling to do in your 40s. But I realized, wow, this is doable. And not only is it doable, we lived with my in-laws and we were able to help them out. I saw the benefit that maybe a lot of other cultures do as far as multi-generational housing. And so I think that's going to be part of this social impact of this code. And I don't know if it got talked about enough as the two sides were going back and forth. But I think whether it's multi-generational housing or as you do, you have close friends that are living in your basement apartment. So one of the other limits, and maybe we're scheduled to get into this, but is there's going to be a limit on the size of single-family house that you can build. And I think a lot of times people will complain. The big complaint I hear a lot is, wow, just tired of seeing these big, boxy McMansions. But you look at where that's derived from, and it's really just limits on the code. The code says, here's what you can build, and here's the area that you can build on. And what do builders do typically? Well, we want to maximize that, and so that's what they build. And what ends up happening is we just end up, in my opinion, nothing against modern design. Some people do it very well, but we end up getting a lot of big boxy houses. And so this part of this new zoning change is going to limit the size of single-family housing. I think, quite frankly, it probably will affect the price of people that have older, larger homes, because those are going to become more and more rare. Now, I think there are probably some wrinkles in the code that will allow people to still build maybe that 3,500, 3,600 square foot single family house, but it's just going to provide a lot more options. And
Thanks, Nick. Super. You did jump ahead in a few of the questions. It's awesome. I love it. So, primary reason, why do you think that these zoning changes were made in the city of Seattle?
Just simply, we have an affordability issue. And we have, I think it's responsibility of of the city and the people that live in the city. We can't just become a city of multi-million-dollar houses. I think for the long-term economic sustainability of any city, there are people of different backgrounds and maybe, at different life stages, and we all require various sizes and housing options. And I think we are really starting to limit those. We certainly have density in multifamily, but not everybody wants to live in a high-rise. When you get into a high-rise situation, we get detached from sidewalks, from neighborhoods, from being out on the street. I was reading last night how the healthiest cities, people can walk or roll wherever they are, whether it's if they're literally in a wheelchair or certainly on a bike. And those end up typically being the healthiest cities and really economically the strongest as well. So.
Yeah, well, you mentioned neighborhoods. Like, that's part of my own story is we also, my wife and I with 2 kids, lived in a 500 square foot mother-in-law apartment. Might have even been smaller. A little.
My goal was to live bigger than you were, so, but now you have.
He was living bigger.
650, I had 650.
I got to beat now, but.
Yeah.
But anyways, like, the super big part of our story, and it was one of those things where my wife and I both wanted to live in a neighborhood and be with other families and other people in our community and make relationships with sidewalks and we weren't in a high rise. That's not what we wanted. So we moved to the suburbs when we got married, and we actually rented a little mother-in-law attached dwelling unit. So that is part of our story too, and that neighborhood part, kind of the helping with affordability, right? Helped us get off to a good start, save for a down payment. It wasn't cheaper to buy than rent at that point. It was cheaper to rent, and we got set up for success. So there's different life stages benefit from this for sure.
And really, Zach, all the way through, because I've run into, as you know, a lot of times we build detached accessory dwelling units and we'll sell them separately. And in that, I have spoken to countless people that have lived in a neighborhood for a really long time. And they want to stay in that neighborhood. It's where their social circle is. It's where they feel safe. They've grown up there. Maybe they've had a couple generations of family that have lived there. But quite frankly, when you're on a fixed income, no matter how much money you made in the past, it's getting difficult. Let's take Ballard, for instance. The price of a single family home in Ballard has gotten expensive. And so what this does is this allows maybe the lady that's now a widow, that's lived there forever, to build an ADU or a detached ADU, move into that, rent out her main home, and still afford to live in the neighborhood, certainly have a stream of income.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like building a great little annuity there. And then down the road, if she wants to sell those separately, or if she wants to build, say, another ADU and essentially have a triplex then and have 2 rentals on the property that she's lived in forever, I think that's just a tremendous option. And so I think that's what really the crux of what we're talking about here is giving people options. This is market rate, affordable housing, but not city mandated or dictated affordable housing. This is the market saying, hey, we want to answer back, and whether it's a homeowner or a developer or an investor, if we create more housing options and we increase that supply, that's going to help kind of be a regulator on housing prices, which quite frankly, even as a builder and developer, I think have been out of control. Yeah. It's expensive. Some of that's just driven by the fact that our costs have gone up so much, just raw materials. Yeah. But a lot of it's just, it's just the price of housing and the limited supply.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, these changes over the, next few years, 5-10 years. I mean, my hope is that this will be a, capitalism at its finest. This will be an opportunity really for the market has already spoken. And that's why we're where we're at. People have been pushing for this for a while, but then to see, okay, well, let's see the outflowing of this. Yeah. And I guess the transitionary question, who do you think benefits from these zoning changes in the city of Seattle?
That's a great question. If I were selling this idea, a mentor of mine always said, sell the negatives. So let's talk about what some of the potential negative impacts could be, and then that'll kind of lead us into who is this going to benefit. Again, we talked about some of the concerns that people have. just the overall impact in a neighborhood when you increase density in a neighborhood that maybe isn't used to it. Again, because of the size limits, the setbacks, the overall height, especially even now, a lot of builders don't like the limits on the single family housing, but it just makes us be a little bit more creative. And I think people aren't going to see that impact. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to drive down a street and there won't be any more single family homes and it'll just be big boxy fourplexes. These can get interwoven into a neighborhood. Another one of the negative feelings is that they've eliminated the parking requirement. And I think it's important that they did that because quite frankly, there are a lot of sites in Seattle where you just can't make it fit. Where it would be a great site, it's close to housing, it's say in the Maple Leaf area, close to the new light rail in Roosevelt.
Might not even need a car in general.
You may not need a car. But the fact of the matter is that as a builder developer, I look at it and I go, well, but a lot of the market still likes to have at least, whether it's a garage or an off-street spot. So I think this fear of everything that gets built is going to have no parking and it's going to crowd the streets, I don't think is really that
I don't think the market will allow that.
Because people still expect it and they will pay for it. And if it's done right, there's still a value there. So, and I think having the option of both will be important. So as far as who it's going to benefit, I think in every range, whether you're a renter or you're a homeowner, whether you're looking into getting the ownership market, whether you've been a longtime homeowner and maybe are looking at, wow, I'm a little fearful of what's happening in the stock market or in the economy. Real estate obviously is a great long-term hold, a hedge against inflation. And so I think this is going to give a lot of opportunity for people that may not necessarily want to be a big landlord, but understand and realize the benefit of long-term real estate ownership. So, I think it's going to have a wide range of benefits. There will be obstacles to overcome. There's still a huge cost to building these. They're very expensive to build per foot. There's still a lot of regulatory things that have to be between permitting, sewer impact fees,
well,
things
you've
like
built
that.
these already. You've been doing a version of this a little bit already.
The price per foot gets up there, and then there's if you're a homeowner. As a builder developer, I can go out and I can go ahead and fund these projects like through groups like Legacy or other groups. But if you're a homeowner and you have, let's say, debt on your property, it gets a little bit more difficult. You have to get a line of credit, you have to go and get a private money loan, things like that. So I think there's still work to be done. But I think we're on the right track.
The objection that I hear to that response is that this is really just going to benefit builders and developers. They're going to buy up these houses, they're going to fix them up or tear down the existing house, they're going to build a couple detached units, and now they've got this, they're selling 3 houses and they're really not providing affordable housing. They're still catering to the market and the higher price demographic.
I saw a response to that the other day, and it was kind of a flippant response, but and I don't necessarily agree with it, but somebody said, great, if they do that, if builders and developers do that, that's just going to provide more housing. But as somebody that's underwritten a lot of these already, it's not easy. With the cost involved, it's very small scale, it's incremental development. I like it because I'm a little bit risk averse as a builder and developer, so I like the scale of it. I'm okay with making
an investment as a builder developer than tearing down a house. And
definitely. But again, my passion behind this lies in the fact of, let's take for instance a project that we have in Sunset Hill right now that one of our builders is doing. We preserved a house that was almost 100 years old. I know there were other builders that were looking at buying that, tearing it down, and building a big McMansion. And in order to do that, that's almost what you have to do to afford the land that's underneath the existing home. You have to turn around. If you're going to pay $600,000-$700,000 for a lot, you have to turn around and sell something that's pushing $2 million. So what I loved about this is we preserve this old house. It literally is ready for the next 100 years, and it's going to be a great fit for somebody. And then we're also building and selling separately, in this instance, a detached ADU. So it's going to be a new construction, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, some outdoor space, a little bit of yard space, off-street parking, and it's going to be in the 500s. And to me,
that's affordable housing in Seattle.
Instead of building and developing something that would be 1.6 to 2 million, we're putting spaces. We have product on the market at $899, and we're going to be somewhere in the high fives when the new construction's done. And I like that combination. Now, not everybody, I mean, that's still expensive. Yeah. Let's be honest. That's still expensive. But it does provide more options for people. So
certainly. So Nick, another question for you, challenges. What are some of the challenges to the new zoning in the city of Seattle?
I think for homeowners, for existing homeowners that are interested in doing this, there's going to be 2 big challenges. Okay. Well, maybe 3. One is just the cost to get it done. Okay. And I think there are a couple of small builders out there that aren't necessarily developers. They don't build stuff on spec. They want to build for the homeowner that are great fits, but it's just getting it financed. Okay. Not only is it expensive to do, but getting banks and lenders comfortable with the fact of, okay, how do we analyze this? How do we underwrite it? Is it as a rental properties, commercial, residential? And so I think working through that process.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, it would be a challenge. And then seeing if we can get some relief on some of the regulatory aspects of it, because what we consider in the business are soft costs, but as far as permitting, sewer capacity charge, things like that, some of which gets passed on to the homeowner, like the sewer cap charge, but other things just have to be paid up front. And boy, with the scale of, let's say, 1,000 square foot detached ADU, to overlay some of these costs on it really kind of make it almost prohibitive to actually build. Okay. So, and that's whether you're a homeowner or whether you're
still going to be subject to all these same regulations as the homeowner building your ADU. Yeah. But you'll be eating a lot of those, even the sewer capacity charge if you're not selling the home. So.
Yeah. And then it's just going to be a timing thing. Okay. I think it's a benefit for, say, a homeowner that wants to do this because you can start your permit process and then the construction process actually can be very quick on these detached ADUs. We've really just seen it just in the past 2 years condense quite a bit. And that's when, all of a sudden you've created that, if you're a homeowner, you've created that annuity. Mm-hmm. It's going to be paying you back. Now you're going to have some underlying costs to that, but let's say a new loan or a HELOC or cash that you took out. But most often, I think for most homeowners, it's going to be, how can I finance this? How can I make it work? And then how's it going to benefit me in the long term?
Yeah.
So what's that payback going to be?
Long-term picture. Okay. How about fears that people have? What are some of the major fears that you've heard or experienced and interacted with? And then what would you say to those fears or those people?
Do you want the rational or the irrational?
I'm okay with irrational.
It's amazing how fearful people can get. I think the fear and the biggest fear is that we're going to destroy single family neighborhoods. And I don't really know where that comes from. I had actually a gentleman say to me the other day, well, the zoning for that is over there. It's not here. And I said, well, what? Yeah, literally not in my backyard. And I don't really know where the crux of that came from. I think what he's saying is, well, the multifamily zoning is over there, but the fact of the matter is a huge part of our city is zoned single family. And I think we can keep a lot of that character, which is a lot of people, and rightfully so, me included. I don't want to lose the feel. I love it. You can walk down the street with your kids, you can push a stroller, you can go biking on the sidewalks. Mm-hmm. There's engagement, there's people out working in their yards, there's people sitting on their front porch. We don't need to lose that to radically increase the density of our housing. Yeah. So I think that's one of the fears that people have. Okay. I think they'll see everything just get bulldozed immediately, and trust me, it's just in the underwriting of it, it doesn't make sense, and I just don't think it makes economic sense to go. I think it makes more sense to keep a lot of what we have and then to reutilize it.
Because it's expensive to build a whole new house. So if you can preserve the existing structure, add value to it, right? And get it ready for the next person, but then also
we've seen a lot of fun stuff come out of this too. Like there are companies out there that are saving, preserving, and actually deconstructing when a old home needs to come down. If it has to come down because it's just functional obsolescence, or most often there's just some sort of kind of catastrophic issue with it. There have been some people that have been deconstructing these old houses and then being able to reuse. And it's not just the architectural elements that a lot of us are used to. Oh, we're reusing some old cool windows or the handrail or the crystal knobs, but some of the really costly items, like a lot of the dimensional lumber. And I think that's fun, and we're seeing that get then reused into new construction, into detached ADUs. And so some of that history being preserved even further. So
super cool, super cool. The overall thoughts. What are your overall thoughts about the zoning changes? How do you feel about it?
I feel great.
Yeah.
I feel really, really good. Again, we have a housing issue in the city of Seattle, and quite frankly, in a lot of other cities up here in the Northwest. So I think what this does, again, it's just supply and demand, and it gives a lot more housing options. Housing is essentially a pretty basic need. And again, as we've discussed, that can change as life changes. You know, we go through these different life stages, as you called them. Those housing needs can change, but at some point, we all have that need. And so I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited to see what, I have my own thoughts and feelings and ideas on this, but just to see what the market comes up with. There are people that aren't what you or I wouldn't consider your traditional builder developer, and let's see the kind of product that they come up with. That I've already talked to people about that are looking at doing basements on an ADU that can add a little bit of extra space.
Well, that's interesting.
Because it's what's called free floor area.
You could build an even bigger ADU.
You could.
And accommodate maybe a larger group of people.
You could. Now, I still think what I love is this zoning still regulates, because we still have overall height limits. We have setback limits and things like that. So we don't necessarily, what I don't want to see is maybe negative impact on a neighbor. But what this does is, it allows for some creativity and, okay, how can we build something? And the other thing that I'd like to see in innovation-wise is how can we help out with things like age in place? Because we have an aging demographic, especially in the city of Seattle. We're certainly getting younger, I think, in a lot of and if you go and you're looking at condos or things like that, millennials are starting to come into the market. But we have a lot of baby boomers that still live in the city, and they're looking at, okay, what's my next option, like we discussed before, and can I stay here? Can I do maybe kind of an active adult house in a detached ADU that I can age in place, and not something that, hey, I'm looking at being here for the next 5 to 8 years, but no, I just retired and I can live in this house safely and be healthy and be functional and active, well into my 80s.
Well, and in that situation, they might have their house paid off already.
Exactly.
And have the cash to do the project, and now they can make that move and have rent out the current house. That's huge.
Yeah.
Another question that I've heard, and just more of a question of my own, is statewide. Do you think that the city of Seattle will set a precedence for other cities or the state as a whole as far as the zoning changes?
That's a great question, because this was before this state Senate and the House. There was an ADU kind of, I can't remember what the bill was, and it didn't end up going through. I think people will start to look at the city of Seattle and watch it and see how it goes. We went from really kind of behind the times, to be honest, in Seattle, to now as one on the forefront, as one of the leaders. And I think we'll see over the long term that this is a very creative approach. Maybe not quite as drastic as what the state of Oregon did with, I think it was HB 2001, which essentially the state Senate and legislation voted on, and now it's just up to the governor to sign. Maybe not quite to that level, but in a way still accomplish a lot of the same things, some density. So I still think we have a long way to go. But I like that, again, that we'll see some things that are maybe market driven. And yeah, I think we're going to see other jurisdictions, because look, the state of Washington, we're not going to be expanding our Growth Management Act, and we don't necessarily need to. We're not allowing any more of these big, huge planned developments. I don't think we need to expand the GMA. I think what we need to do is look to our urban cores and say, okay, this is where a lot of people work. This is where a lot of the economy is driven, unless it's agriculture.
Yeah.
And so how can we service people that live and work in those areas? And I think that's going to have we live in a beautiful area, but we only have one shot to preserve. I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
I'm a year or two older than you, right? Year,
only
3.
A couple.
So, but I've seen like Fife River Valley that used to be beautiful, and no offense to the car dealerships there or whatever, but it's been paved over, and we're not going to get that back ever again. And so I think this kind of helps preserve maybe some of that outdoor entertainment and joy that we have, and then concentrate that density in more appropriate areas. So that's a long way of answering your question, but yes, I think we're definitely going to see other cities look at this. So, and it could be an economic benefit. Look, it's going to help increase the property tax base as well.
Oh yeah, well if you own all that and have 3 structures on it, all of a sudden the city's making a bunch more money off of the properties too. Yeah. Or even if they were divided up, it's still gonna, it's gonna bring a lot more money.
Now hopefully, City of Seattle,
if you're watching this, which you probably will eventually.
Mayor Durkin, Council, hopefully they're good stewards of that and utilizing the funds that this will generate. And put that to good use.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to live, so it's fun to see try to have creative ways to keep that.
There's been a lot of negativity lately, and a lot of it really does stem from this affordable housing issue or lack of housing options, I like to say. And I think this is really, really going to change that. So a lot of people, I've built a lot of townhomes in my lifetime. And not necessarily everybody wants attached walls or some people love that. They just turn the key, they close the door, they leave, they don't have anything to worry about. But there are a lot of people like us that, hey, we want to spend some time in the garden or we want to have a little bit of yard space. And so this really provides a great mix of product.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as a pretty good salesperson, but I don't think I could sell my wife on a townhouse. So the last question I had, and this is one I always talk about the real estate market. I mean, people that are watching this are usually watching my market updates, and I talk about housing prices and where the market's going, where it's been. Where do you think housing prices are going to go as a result of this? So just as a direct result of this, regardless of what the market will do, because the market always goes up and down, there's going to be changes and corrections and blips, but overall, in the long run, what do you think? How do you think this will impact housing prices?
I think it's a great question. I think there are a couple nuances to this.
Okay.
One, it'll really be interesting to see, and I don't know the answer to this, but what's this impact? What's the direct impact of the zoning part, the part of the zoning change that said, hey, you can no longer, there's a limit on the size of single-family home that you can build. And without getting into the weeds, it's what's called a 0.5 FAR. If you have a 5,000 square foot lot, you can build a 2,500 square foot home. Now, again, there are certain...
You're not going to have a 3,800 square foot house on a 3,000 square foot lot.
There are certain wrinkles in that zone where they don't count basement square footage and things like that. But in essence, that's really going to change. And so that's going to limit a lot of the bigger homes. Is that going to affect the existing housing stock that maybe is that 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house? Is that going to drive the value up? Maybe, potentially.
Do they even need how big of a house, or are they just buying it because that's what's...
My opinion is no, that they don't. My opinion is on a smaller house, you can get so much more creative with how you program the layout, with the types of finishes that you have. If you have a 1,200 square foot house, you can afford price per foot to do some pretty nice finishes. If you have 4,000, 5,000 now, generally maybe if you're building one that big.
Just kind of getting spec. at that point.
And do you really need, I think we need to look at how do we use our housing? Do we really need, do I need a room that I do, separate room for yoga and a separate room for, not that I do yoga.
You should see him do yoga in his stretchy pants. Hot yoga right here.
It's a beautiful thing. But do I really need a separate room, or can we have multifunctional space that really works? So as far as, back to your question, I think it's yet to be seen as to what it'll do for the larger single family home. I think it's gonna help value of a lot of people maybe that were sitting on a house that maybe needs some work. I think those kind of houses will become ideal for builders and developers like me that are looking at, hey, let's go ahead and restore that house, potentially build an ADU rental in there, and then let's go ahead and build a detached ADU. So yeah, we'll see. I think what it's gonna do though is I could see if we start to see more and more of this, of these housing options come on the market, I don't think it's gonna hurt housing pricing at all, but I think what it's going to do is help regulate it a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, when we have more options, when people can say go out and rent a detached ADU and they don't have to spend
a mortgage,
or what's it cost to rent a single family house in Seattle these days that needs work? $3,000, $3,500.
More than my mortgage.
Yeah. And so I think this is going to help provide some options, which again, really, when we increase supply. That always helps.
Yeah. Well, and demand is continuing to increase too. So
yeah,
this is forward thinking. It's already kind of too late, but hopefully we can make up for some lost ground.
Yeah, we're such a strong education and innovation center, and within not just the city of Seattle, but Bellevue, Kirkland, the East Side. And that's a benefit to us. No matter what people think about some of the larger tech companies or Amazon or Microsoft, that is certainly a benefit to us. And the fact is that because we're that way, we are going to continue to grow. And so how can we house and provide housing and provide not just housing, but safe, kind of vibrant communities for people to live in? And I think this is a start. I certainly don't think it's I think it's just the beginning, but.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.